You've probably prayed some version of this without ever feeling its edge. Search me, O God, and know my heart. We treat it like a request for reassurance. God, look inside and tell me I'm okay. But that's almost the opposite of what it says. David wrote it 3,000 years ago, and the words he chose aren't soft ones. Search, test. In the original, they carry the weight of an investigation, to examine, to probe, to prove under pressure. It's a prayer that asks God to show you what you've been hiding, the motive underneath the good deed, the fear you've dressed up as faith, the thing you'd rather not name. And the strange mercy of it is this: the light that exposes all of that is not there to shame you, it's there to free you. Let's read this prayer the way it was actually written, and see why asking to be seen might be the most courageous thing you do. Here's how most of us meet these words for the first time. Maybe it's stitched onto a pillow. Maybe it closes a worship song, the lights low, everyone's eyes shut. Search me, O God, and know my heart. It washes over you like warm water. It feels like being held. And so, without ever deciding to, we file it away under a certain heading, the heading of comfort. We hear it as God leaning in to reassure us, you're doing fine. Your heart's in the right place. Rest now. And that reading isn't wrong because it's unkind. It's just incomplete. It stops at the doorway of what David actually prayed. Think about where the instinct comes from. Most of us come to a verse like this already tired. We've been managing an inner life that nobody sees. The resentment we swallowed at dinner. The comparison that flared up scrolling through someone else's good news. The prayer we said out loud that didn't match the thought underneath it. We're not looking to be examined. We're looking to be excused. So we take the softest possible meaning and we hold on to it because the softest meaning asks nothing of us. And here's the quiet thing that happens when we do that. We turn a prayer into a mirror that only ever tells us we're the fairest of them all. We ask God to look, but we've already decided what we want Him to find. You know this move because you make it in ordinary life too. When someone who loves you says, "Can I be honest with you about something?" Notice what your body does. That half-second flinch. Part of you wants the honesty. A louder part wants the reassurance that came before it, the version where you didn't have to hear the hard thing. We do the same with God. We say, "Search me," but what we mean is soothe me. And I want to be careful here because this is exactly where a lot of religious talk goes wrong. This is not about catching yourself being a fraud. It's not a setup for guilt. Wanting comfort from God is not a sin. He is a comforter. The point is smaller and stranger than that. The point is that when we only ever hear these words as comfort, we miss the gift David was actually reaching for. We take the pillow and we leave the treasure sitting right next to it. Because David wasn't a man who needed a pillow. Read the rest of Psalm 139, and you meet someone who has already been thinking hard about being seen. In the opening verses 1 through 6, he's almost overwhelmed by it. You have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. He says there's not a word on his tongue that God doesn't already know completely. He says if he tried to flee from God's presence, up to the heavens, down to the grave, out to the far side of the sea, God would already be there. So by the time we reach the end of the psalm, David is not a man nervously asking God to take a first look at a stranger. He's a man who has just spent an entire poem realizing he has never, for 1 second of his life, been unseen. And that's what makes the last line so surprising, because a man who already knows he's completely seen turns around and asks to be searched anyway, which raises the question the pillow version never lets us ask. If God already knows everything, every motive, every buried thing, then what on earth is David actually requesting? What does it mean to ask to be searched by someone who has already found you? That's where the words themselves come in, and the words in the original are not gentle words at all. So let's slow down and actually look at the 2 words David chose, because in English they sound like the softest verbs in the world. Search me, try me. And in Hebrew, they are anything but soft. The first word, translated search, is chakar. And this is not the word you'd use for glancing around a room. It's the word the Old Testament uses for the deep, effortful digging of a miner going after precious metal, following a vein of gold down into the dark, chipping through rock to reach what's buried. It's also the word for a scout, sent to explore unknown, even hostile territory, mapping it thoroughly, missing nothing. When David says, "Search me," he is not asking God for a friendly once-over. He is handing God a lantern and a pickaxe and saying, "Go all the way down, follow the vein. Don't stop at the surface where I look fine." The second word, try, or in some translations, test, is bachan. And this one is even more striking because it comes from the world of the refiner. Bachan is what you do to gold and silver in the fire. You heat the metal until it turns to liquid, and the impurities, the things that were hidden inside the solid bar, invisible from the outside, rise to the surface where they can finally be lifted away. The prophets use this exact word for it. It's the language of the crucible. Picture the refiner at his fire in the ancient world. He watches the surface of the molten silver, waiting, and he knows the metal is ready only when it goes still and clear enough that he can see his own face reflected in it. That's the image sitting inside the word David chose. Now sit with what David is actually saying when you put those 2 words back where they belong. Shakar, dig down into me like a miner after buried gold. Bachan, put me in the fire like metal being refined. That is not a prayer for reassurance. That is a prayer that invites the 2 most searching processes a person in the ancient world could imagine, mining and refining, and turns them inward onto the heart. David is asking to be excavated and to be melted down. He is asking for the hidden vein to be followed and the buried impurity to be brought up into the light. And here's the piece that both of us need to hear from opposite directions. If you've come to this prayer nervous, afraid of what a search like that might turn up, notice what the fire is for. The refiner doesn't heat the gold because he's angry at it. He heats it because he can see something valuable under the impurity, and he wants the gold, not the dross. The whole point of Bachan is not destruction, it's recovery. The fire is how the precious thing gets rescued from what was choking it. And if you're the kind of person who wants the mechanism, not just the metaphor, look at how the grammar works. Both words in verse 23 are in the form of a command that David gives to God. He isn't bracing himself for an inspection he's dreading. He is the one holding the door open. He's saying, "You do this. I'm asking you to." The searching is something he requests, not something he suffers. Which brings us back to the strange thing we noticed at the end of the last section. David already knows God sees everything. He spent the whole psalm saying so. So why command a search of what's already fully known? Here's the answer the text quietly gives. The search was never for God's benefit. God doesn't learn anything from Chakar. He already knows the vein and the impurity down to the atom. The search is for David. He's asking God to bring up into David's own sight what David cannot see on his own. The motive under the motive. The fear wearing the costume of faith. Because that's the honest problem, isn't it? It was never that God couldn't see us. It's that we can't see ourselves. And that changes everything about what this prayer is doing, which is where it gets personal. Here's the problem we don't like to admit. We are, all of us, unreliable narrators of our own lives. You've seen it in other people. The friend who insists he's just being honest when he's actually being cruel. The relative who calls her control concern. It's obvious from the outside. What's harder to accept is that the same blind spot lives in us, and by definition, we can't see it, because it's the very thing doing the seeing. The eye can't look at itself. We rationalize, we soften, we tell ourselves the flattering version, and over time, we forget there was ever another one. This is why David's prayer is so radical, and why the pillow version robs us of it. David isn't asking God for information God lacks. He's asking to be shown to himself. He's saying, "I know I can't be trusted to audit my own heart. I'll always grade myself on a curve. So I'm asking the one set of eyes that sees clean and true. Come do what I can't do for myself." And notice what kind of things a search like that actually turns up. Not usually the dramatic sins we brace for. It's subtler than that. It's the generosity that was quietly keeping score. The patience that was really just conflict avoidance wearing a halo. The prayer that sounded humble, but was angling to be overheard. The forgiveness we announced, but never actually handed over. These are the buried veins Chakar goes after. The motive underneath the good deed, the thing we'd never name, because we've never even let ourselves look at it. Now here is the part most people miss completely. The turn that the whole prayer has been building toward. You would think a request like this would be terrifying. Ask God to excavate every hidden motive, to melt you down until the impurities float up. That should feel like standing in a doctor's office waiting for the worst possible diagnosis. And yet, David asks for it freely, even eagerly. Why isn't he afraid? Go back to where the psalm started. For 22 verses before this prayer, David has been saying one thing over and over. You already know me completely. You knew my words before I spoke them. You knew me in the womb. There is nowhere I could go, not the heights, not the depths, not the far side of the sea, where you aren't already there, already knowing. Do you see what that does? By the time David asks to be searched, he has already established that there is nothing the search could find that God doesn't already see. The excavation can't uncover a single thing that would make God love him less, because God was already holding all of it the whole time and stayed. That's the ground the courage stands on. You can only invite this kind of searching when you already know you're safe. If you thought God's love depended on the search coming back clean, you'd never pray Shakar. You'd hide the way we've all hidden, arranging the good version of ourselves for inspection. But David isn't auditioning. He already knows he's fully seen and fully kept, and that's precisely what frees him to say, "Then go ahead, look all the way down. I'm not afraid of what you'll find because you've already found it and you're still here." This is the difference between two kinds of being seen. One is the fear of exposure, the dread that if people knew the real you, they'd leave. Most of us carry some version of that, but there is another kind, almost the opposite, and it's the rarest relief a human being can know, to be completely seen. Every buried thing, every motive you're ashamed of, and to be completely loved in the same breath. Not loved because you hid it well, loved with it fully in view. That's what David is reaching for, not an inspection he passes, a love he no longer has to perform for. And once you understand that, the last thing David says, the part everyone reads right past, turns out to be the whole point. David doesn't end the prayer with the search. He ends it with where the search is meant to lead. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Lead me. That's the destination. The digging and the fire were never the point. They were the clearing of the road. David isn't asking to be exposed so he can feel bad. He's asking to be freed, to have the hidden thing brought up into the light, precisely so it can finally be dealt with, healed, walked out of. You cannot be led out of a room you refuse to admit you're standing in. The search is how you finally see the room. The leading is God walking you out of it. And that's the answer to the question we started with. Why asking to be seen might be the most courageous thing you ever do, because it is. It takes almost nothing to ask God to reassure you. It takes everything to ask Him to show you, to say, in effect, I would rather see the truth about myself in your light than stay comfortable in the dark. That's not the courage of a person who thinks they'll pass. It's the courage of a person who has stopped needing to pass, who has finally understood that the light exposing them is not a searchlight hunting for a reason to condemn. It's the light of someone who already knows the worst and has never once looked away. If this is speaking to you, take a second and subscribe. There's fresh manna here every single day. And I'd love to keep walking through Scripture like this with you. And if you made it this far, I already know something about you. You're not looking for the comfortable version. You're the kind of person willing to actually pray, search me, and mean it. That's rarer than you think. Tell me in the comments, has there been a moment when God showed you something about yourself that you couldn't see on your own? I read those, and they matter. Here's what I keep coming back to. We spend so much of our lives afraid of being found out. We manage the impression. We curate the good angle. We keep the back rooms locked, terrified that if the whole truth came out, we'd be unlovable. And into all of that, David hands us a prayer that does the exact opposite. It doesn't lock the doors. It flings them open and says, you who already knows everything, no, come in, search me, try me. I'm done hiding from you because I've finally understood there was never a version of me you didn't already see and love. That's the strange mercy hidden inside these old words. Chakar, the miner going after buried gold. But Chan, the fire that lifts the impurity so the gold can shine. Both of them, it turns out, are not the tools of a judge. They're the tools of someone who sees something precious in you and refuses to leave it buried. So the next time you pray, "Search me, O God, and know my heart," you don't have to flinch. You can pray it the way David did, not as a nervous plea, but as the bravest, freest thing a soul can say to the God who already knows it fully. Look all the way down. I'm not afraid of what you'll find. You've already found it, and you stayed. Scripture explained, faith applied, life changed. This was your daily manna. Come hungry tomorrow.